I start by using a Sharpie to trace my design out onto a piece of 1095 high carbon steel, and I'll leave a link in the description to where I got this steel. Then I use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel to get out the rough shape. And I try and get as close as possible with the angle grinder, that way it's less work on the sander. Here's what it looks like when I'm done cutting it out. I use a 6x48 belt sander to smooth out the profile and remove all the sharp edges. And I use a rat tail file for the spots I can't reach on the belt sander. Then a Dremel to clean up any rough spots the file left. Now I'm marking the holes for my pins with a Sharpie. And then I center punch them. I drill my 2 pinholes first, and then I use a little bit bigger drill bit to drill a bunch of random holes in the knife to make it lighter. Then I use a countersink bit to clean them up. I use the calipers and a Sharpie to mark out my jimping. I start off going slow with a round file, but once I get a pretty good groove in there, I get going faster. I go about 3/4 of the way across, and then I alternate back and forth. And I took a flat file and went over the points to give it a little bit different design. Now I go over it with the drum sander in the drill press, using like some 220 grit sandpaper. And here's what the jimping looks like. Now it's time for the bevels. So I take a Sharpie and go over the edge part, and then I scribe a center line with the calipers, and this will give me something to grind to. I'm going to be hollow grinding this knife, so I put it in this jig that I made. It's basically just a file guide, but it helps me to have nice even plunge lines. I'm using a 36 grit belt to kind of hog off most of the material, and then once I get it close, I'll come back in with a 120 to clean it up. But if you're freehand hollow grinding for the first time, I'd recommend just doing the whole thing with a 120 grit. I put the GoPro on a chest mount to kind of get a cool angle. Here I'm stamping the knife using a stamping jig me and my dad made. I put my maker's mark on it and then 2018 on the other side because I'm making this for a graduation present. I used the drum sander with 220 grit sandpaper to clean everything up. And I used a 120 grit belt for the bevels. And now it's ready for heat treat. Here's what it looks like.
There she goes, folks.
I heat it up till the edge is non-magnetic, and then I quench it in motor oil. It skates a file, so it's hard. I forgot to show, but I also put it in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour to temper it. I'm laminating up some scales now, and I just scuffed up all the pieces with some rough sandpaper and then used a 2-part epoxy. And I did it all on parchment paper, that way it didn't stick to my flat surface. Even though it was 5-minute epoxy, I let it dry overnight before I took the clamps off. Next, I traced out a piece big enough for the scales, and then I cut it out on the bandsaw. Then I square everything up on the sander. Then I cut me some stainless steel pins. And I marked my pinholes with a drill bit. I drilled my holes before I split my scales. That way when I pinned them on, my handles would automatically line up. If I could only give you one tip for knife making, it would be don't get in a rush. Here I got in a little bit of a rush, which made me drill my holes too far apart, so I had to wallow out the hole on my knife more, and it was a big pain. Now I ripped the piece down on the bandsaw, and then cut out the shape of my scales. I marked my holes out onto a piece of red G10 to use for spacers, and then drill them out. More tracing, and back to the bandsaw. Here I'm doing a test fit of all the pieces. And sand them down to make everything even. Then I put them on the knife and get them as close as possible before the glue up. I scuff up all the pieces with rough sandpaper and wipe off the dust, and then the handles are ready to be epoxied on. Now I clean off all the scale from the forge with the drum sander on the drill press. For the grinds, I started off with a scale removing belt and then cleaned it up with a Scotch-Brite belt, and that put a good finish on it. I left the scale in the jimping, that way it would contrast better, but here's what it looked like before the glue up. Now I wipe the blade off with lacquer thinner and then tape off anything I don't want to get epoxy on. Unfortunately, I didn't get the video of the glue up, but that's pretty self-explanatory. You just slather epoxy on all the pieces and then put them together and then clamp it. And here's what it looks like after that. I let it dry overnight and then cut the pins off with an angle grinder. Then I sand the profile of the knife. And the spots I can't reach with the sander, I use a file. Then I take it back to the sander to get the handle thickness that I want. And here it is after that. Then I take it back to the sander to round it off, and then I finish rounding it off with this palm sander. Now I clean it up on the drum sander. And then touch up some spots with the Dremel. I do my final sanding by hand with 220 grit sandpaper, and then I give it a coat of boiled linseed oil. And I put on a thick coat, let it sit for about 10 minutes, then wipe it off. Then I let it sit for an hour to dry, and then I repeat the process and do as many coats as I want. I usually do about 3 coats. And when that dried, I put a couple coats of spray-on polyurethane on it. And for that, you just go by the directions. After that fully dried, I just used a 1x30 belt sander to put my edge on there, and I stepped down from a really heavy grit all the way down to a leather. At this point, you really want to have a cup of water next to you to dip it in, that way you don't overheat it and lose your heat treat. And now the knife's all done. It shaves and it cuts paper, so it's sharp. I didn't show me making a sheath for it because if I did, the video would be over 20 minutes long, but I'll probably do a separate video on that. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them, and let me know what you want to see me do next. Anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. See ya.